What happens when a Hollywood legend steps onto a talk show stage, expecting a warm welcome, only to face a barrage of provocative questions that push the boundaries of respect? On a crisp morning in New York City, Meryl Streep, one of the most revered actresses of our time, walked onto the set of Live with Kelly and Mark to promote her latest film. The audience buzzed with anticipation, eager to hear from the icon. But what unfolded over the next 20 minutes would become a moment etched in television history, a clash that no one saw coming. This is the story of Meryl Streep's unforgettable confrontation with Kelly Ripa, a moment that left the studio in stunned silence and sparked a firestorm of debate across the globe. The Live with Kelly and Mark studio was a kaleidoscope of lights and energy. The set, bathed in warm tones of gold and red, hummed with the familiar buzz of a live audience. Rows of eager fans, clutching coffee cups and waving homemade signs, filled the seats, their chatter mingling with the soft hum of cameras gliding into position. The air smelled faintly of hairspray and studio lights, and the faint clatter of heels on the polished floor signaled the crew's last-minute preparations. Kelly Ripa, petite and radiant in a tailored emerald dress, stood at the center of the stage, her smile wide but her eyes sharp, hinting at the unpredictable energy she was known for. Beside her, Mark Consuelos, her co-host and husband, adjusted his tie, exuding a relaxed charm that balanced Kelly's intensity. Backstage, producers darted between monitors, their headsets crackling with instructions. The control room was a hive of activity, with screens displaying close-ups of the audience, the set, and the empty chair where Meryl Streep would soon sit. The show had been hyped for weeks. Meryl was promoting The Weight of Time, a poignant drama about aging and legacy, and her appearance was expected to be a highlight of the season. The audience, a mix of young professionals, retirees, and die-hard fans, buzzed with excitement, their phones already out to capture the moment Meryl stepped onto the stage. The show began with its signature upbeat montage, the theme music swelling as Kelly and Mark bantered about the day's headlines. The audience laughed at their playful chemistry, clapping along as Kelly teased Mark about his latest cooking mishap. Then, with a flourish, Kelly turned to the camera, her voice rising with excitement. "Ladies and gentlemen, our guest today needs no introduction. She's a legend, an icon, and one of the greatest actresses of all time. Please welcome Meryl Streep." The crowd erupted into applause as Meryl emerged from behind the curtain. Dressed in an elegant cream blazer and navy slacks, her silver hair swept into a loose bun, she exuded a quiet grace. Her smile was warm but reserved, her eyes scanning the audience with a mix of gratitude and curiosity. She waved, her movements deliberate, and settled into the plush chair across from Kelly and Mark. The studio lights caught the subtle shimmer of her earrings, and for a moment, the atmosphere felt like a celebration of her storied career. "Meryl, it's such an honor to have you here," Kelly began, her voice dripping with enthusiasm. "You've been in this industry for decades, and you're still at the top of your game. The Weight of Time is already generating Oscar buzz. Tell us about this incredible project." Meryl leaned forward, her hands clasped lightly in her lap. "Thank you, Kelly, Mark. It's a film that's very close to my heart. It's about the passage of time, the choices we make, and how we find meaning in the later chapters of our lives. I think it's something we all grapple with, and I hope it resonates with audiences." The audience nodded, some dabbing their eyes as Meryl's words struck a chord. Mark chimed in, his tone earnest. "It's such a beautiful story, Meryl. I saw the film last week, and I was blown away by how you captured the character's vulnerability. It's like you disappear into every role." Meryl smiled, her eyes crinkling. "That's very kind, Mark. I try to find the truth in every character, no matter how small the role." The conversation flowed smoothly for the first few minutes, with Meryl sharing anecdotes about the film's production and her co-stars. The audience hung on her every word, their laughter and applause punctuating her stories. But there was a subtle shift in Kelly's demeanor, a glint in her eye, a slight edge to her smile, that hinted at something brewing beneath the surface. Nobody in the studio was prepared for what came next. As Meryl finished describing a challenging scene, Kelly leaned forward, her hands clasped tightly on the desk. "Meryl, you're known for these incredibly transformative roles, But let's talk about something else for a moment, she said, her tone shifting from warm to pointed. You've been in the spotlight for decades, and yet you've stayed relatively quiet on some of the biggest issues of our time. Some people, myself included, wonder why someone with your platform doesn't speak out more on political and social issues. Don't you think you have a responsibility to use your voice? The question landed like a thunderclap. The audience, which had been clapping moments earlier, fell into a hushed silence. A few gasps rippled through the crowd, and one woman in the front row clutched her phone, her thumb hovering over the record button. Meryl's smile faltered, but only for a split second. She tilted her head, her expression calm but her eyes narrowing slightly. Well, Kelly, Meryl began, her voice steady, I believe art itself is a form of activism. The stories we tell, the characters we portray, they can challenge perspectives, spark conversations, and inspire change in ways that are sometimes more powerful than a speech or a protest. I've always tried to choose roles that say something meaningful. Kelly didn't miss a beat. Sure, but isn't that a bit of a cop-out? She pressed, her voice laced with a mix of curiosity and challenge. I mean, you're Meryl Streep. People listen to you. Why not take a stand on the issues tearing this country apart? Climate change, inequality, political division. Are you afraid of alienating your audience? The air in the studio grew thick with tension. Mark shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his smile strained as he glanced between Kelly and Meryl. A few audience members exchanged wide-eyed looks, while others leaned forward, sensing the shift in tone. Behind the cameras, a producer whispered urgently into her headset, her face pale. The control room monitors zoomed in on Meryl's face, capturing the subtle tightening of her jaw. Meryl took a slow breath, her fingers brushing against the armrest. I'm not afraid of speaking out, Kelly, she said, her voice measured but firm. But I believe my job is to tell stories that reflect the human experience, not to lecture. Art has a way of reaching people's hearts in ways that politics often can't. I've always trusted my audience to draw their own conclusions. The audience murmured, some nodding in agreement, others looking skeptical. Kelly leaned back, crossing her arms. That's a lovely sentiment, Meryl, but some might say it's a privilege to stay above the fray. Not everyone has the luxury of being neutral. The word neutral hung in the air like an accusation. Meryl's eyes flashed, but she maintained her composure, her hands now clasped tightly in her lap. Mark jumped in, his voice overly cheerful. You know, I think what Meryl's saying is that art can be a bridge, right? It brings people together. His attempt to defuse the situation fell flat, as Kelly's gaze remained locked on Meryl. Kelly's next question came faster, sharper. Let's get real for a second, Meryl. You've played these incredible, strong women, activists, leaders, fighters. But off-screen, you've been criticized for not walking the walk. There are people out there who say you're more interested in awards than in making a real difference. How do you respond to that? The studio went deathly quiet. A man in the back row coughed nervously, the sound echoing in the silence. Meryl's face remained composed, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of hurt. She leaned forward, her voice low but piercing. I've spent my career telling stories that matter to me, stories about women, about justice, about the human spirit. If that's not walking the walk, I'm not sure what is. I don't measure my impact by headlines or hashtags. Kelly smirked, undeterred. But headlines matter, Meryl. You've got a platform most people can only dream of. When you stay silent on issues like systemic racism or the climate crisis, it sends a message. Some might even call it complicity. The word complicity hit like a slap. The audience gasped audibly now, and a few people began whispering to their neighbors. One woman started recording on her phone, her hands trembling slightly. Mark's face flushed, and he opened his mouth to speak, but Kelly barreled on. I'm just saying what a lot of people are thinking, Meryl. You're a legend, but are you using your power to its fullest? Or are you just coasting on your legacy? Meryl's lips pressed into a thin line. She glanced at the audience, her eyes scanning the sea of faces, some sympathetic, others judgmental. The cameras zoomed in, catching the subtle tremor in her hands as she smoothed her blazer. "Kelly," she said, her voice steady but laced with steel, "I've never coasted a day in my life. Every role I take, every story I tell, is a choice to shine a light on something I believe in. I don't need to shout from a soapbox to make a difference." The audience erupted into scattered applause, but Kelly wasn't finished. "That's a great soundbite, Meryl, but let's be honest. You've got the privilege to pick and choose your battles. Not everyone can afford to be so selective." Her tone was dripping with sarcasm now, and the audience shifted uncomfortably, unsure whether to clap or stay silent. Mark tried again to intervene, his voice strained. "Okay, let's take a step back. Meryl, maybe you could tell us more about the inspiration behind The Weight of Time?" But his words were drowned out by the mounting tension between the two women. Meryl's gaze locked onto Kelly's, her expression unreadable but her voice steady. "I choose my battles carefully, Kelly, because I believe in fighting with purpose, not for applause. If you think that's privilege, maybe you should look at how you're using your platform right now." The audience gasped again, louder this time. A few people clapped, while others stared in stunned silence. The control room was in chaos, with producers shouting into their headsets and cameras swiveling to capture every angle. Kelly's smile faltered, but she quickly recovered, leaning forward with a glint in her eye. "Oh, Meryl, I'm just asking the questions people want answers to. Isn't that my job?" The air crackled with tension, the studio teetering on the edge of something explosive. Nobody, not the audience, not Mark, not the producers, could have predicted what would happen next. To be continued in Part 2. What do you think of this escalating clash? Should Meryl have responded differently, or is Kelly crossing a line? Share your thoughts in the comments, and stay tuned for the dramatic conclusion. The Live with Kelly and Mark studio was a pressure cooker, the air thick with anticipation. Meryl Streep sat poised but resolute, her piercing gaze fixed on Kelly Ripa, who leaned forward with a defiant smirk. The audience, caught in the crossfire of their verbal sparring, was a mix of stunned silence and restless murmurs. Some clutched their phones, recording every second, while others sat frozen, their eyes darting between the two women. Mark Consuelos, visibly uneasy, fiddled with a pen, his attempts to steer the conversation back to safer ground ignored. The faint hum of cameras and the occasional creak of a chair were the only sounds punctuating the tense silence. Kelly, undeterred by Meryl's sharp retort, doubled down. "Meryl, I'm just doing my job, asking the tough questions," she said, her voice laced with a mix of bravado and challenge. "But let's cut to the chase. You've been called out before for staying out of the fray. People want to know, why does Meryl Streep, the Queen of Hollywood, shy away from taking a stand? Is it because you don't want to risk your perfect image?" The accusations sliced through the studio like a blade. A woman in the third row gasped audibly, her hand flying to her mouth, while a man nearby whispered, "She didn't just say that." The control room erupted in chaos, producers barking orders to keep the cameras rolling. One monitor zoomed in on Meryl's face, capturing the subtle clench of her jaw and the fire in her eyes. Her hands resting on the armrests, tightened briefly before relaxing, a deliberate act of restraint. Meryl leaned forward slightly, her voice low but resonant, each word carefully chosen. "Kelly, I've spent my life telling stories that challenge, provoke, and inspire. If you think that's shying away, you're missing the point. Art doesn't need a megaphone to change hearts. It does so quietly, deeply, and lastingly. I'm not here to play to the headlines or to your ratings." The audience erupted into a wave of applause, some standing in support, their cheers echoing off the studio walls. But Kelly wasn't backing down. She tilted her head, her smile sharp. "That's beautiful, Meryl, really. But isn't it convenient to hide behind art when the world's burning? People are out there marching, risking everything, while you're, what? Playing dress-up in another Oscar-worthy role?" The crowd gasped again, louder this time, and a few boos rippled through the audience. Mark's face flushed crimson, and he leaned forward, his voice urgent. "Okay, let's take a breath here. Meryl, your work has inspired so many." But Kelly cut him off, her eyes locked on Meryl. No, Mark, let's not sugarcoat this. Meryl, you've got a voice that could move mountains. Why not use it to call out the people in power, the systems failing us? Or is that too messy for you? The studio was a tinderbox, ready to ignite. A young woman in the audience began filming, her phone shaking in her hands, while an older man shook his head in disbelief. The producers in the control room were in full panic mode, one shouting, "Do we cut to commercial?" while another hissed, "No, this is gold." The cameras swiveled, capturing every angle: Meryl's composed but steely expression, Kelly's defiant posture, Mark's futile attempts to regain control. Meryl's eyes narrowed, her voice taking on a quiet intensity that silenced the room. "Kelly, you seem to think that activism is only valid if it's loud, if it's on your terms. But let me ask you something." She paused, her gaze unwavering. "When you use your platform to tear people down, to twist their choices into something they're not, what are you achieving? Ratings? Clicks? Or are you just bullying under the guise of journalism?" The audience erupted into a mix of cheers and gasps. A few people stood clapping fiercely, while others whispered in shock. Kelly's smile vanished, her face paling for a fraction of a second before she recovered, her voice sharp. "Bullying? Meryl, I'm just asking what everyone's thinking. You're a public figure. People expect more from you." Meryl stood slowly, her movements deliberate, her cream blazer catching the light as she rose. The studio fell into a stunned hush, the only sound the faint click of her heels against the floor. She smoothed her blazer, her eyes never leaving Kelly's. "I came here to talk about a film that means something to me, to share a story that might touch someone's heart. But you've made it clear you're more interested in spectacle than substance. I don't know you, or anyone, an explanation for how I choose to live my life or use my voice." The audience was on its feet now, some cheering, others shouting in dissent. A woman in the back row wiped tears from her eyes, while a man nearby yelled, "You tell her, Meryl!" The cameras zoomed in, capturing the tremble in Kelly's hands as she gripped the desk. Mark, desperate to salvage the moment, stammered, "Meryl, please, let's talk about the film." But Meryl raised a hand, silencing him. Her voice, steady and commanding, filled the studio. "I've spent decades telling stories that challenge injustice, that celebrate resilience, that honor the human spirit. If you can't see the activism in that, Kelly, that's your failure, not mine. Art is my protest, my rebellion, my way of making the world better. And I won't let you reduce it to a soundbite." The studio was electric, the audience roaring with applause. A few people chanted Meryl's name, while others sat in stunned silence, processing the weight of her words. Kelly's face was a mask of shock, her usual quick wit failing her. She opened her mouth to respond, but Meryl wasn't finished. She turned to the audience, her eyes softening but her voice firm. "You don't need to shout to make a difference. You don't need to tear others down to lift yourself up. Choose what matters to you, and fight for it in your own way, whether it's through art, action, or simply kindness." With that, Meryl turned and walked toward the stage exit, her head held high. The audience erupted into a standing ovation, their cheers drowning out the frantic whispers of the producers. The cameras followed her every step, capturing the graceful sweep of her blazer and the determined set of her shoulders. Kelly sat frozen, her hands clenched on the desk, while Mark scrambled to fill the silence. "Wow, what a moment, folks! We'll be right back after this break." As Meryl disappeared behind the curtain, the studio descended into chaos. Audience members were on their phones, posting clips to social media, while others debated heatedly with their neighbors. In the control room, producers shouted conflicting orders, one demanding a commercial break, another insisting they stay live to capture the aftermath. The monitors showed a close-up of Kelly's face, her expression a mix of defiance and unease, and Mark's forced smile as he tried to regain control. Backstage, Meryl's team rushed to her side, but she waved them off, her face calm but resolute. She slipped into a waiting car outside the studio, the roar of the crowd still echoing in her ears. The moment she left, the clip of her speech began spreading like wildfire online, racking up millions of views within hours. Hashtags like hashtag Meryl Speaks and hashtag Art is Activism trended globally, while pundits and fans alike dissected the confrontation. The fallout was immediate and explosive. News outlets ran headlines like, "Meryl Streep storms off live with Kelly and Mark after heated clash," and "Kelly Ripa's provocation backfires in epic showdown." Social media was a battleground, with some praising Meryl's dignity and others accusing her of dodging accountability. Kelly's supporters argued she was just doing her job, asking the tough questions, while Meryl's fans hailed her as a beacon of grace under pressure. The clip of her speech was shared across platforms, with influencers and activists weighing in on the power of art as a form of resistance. The show's ratings spiked, but Kelly faced backlash for what many called an unprofessional attack. Some called for an apology, while others defended her right to challenge a public figure. Meryl, meanwhile, remained silent, letting her words on the stage speak for themselves. Her film, The Weight of Time, saw a surge in ticket sales, with audiences flocking to theaters to see the story she'd fought to share. In the days that followed, the debate raged on. Was Meryl right to defend her approach to activism, or should she have engaged more directly with Kelly's questions? Was Kelly's provocation a bold journalistic move or a cheap shot for ratings? The moment became a cultural touchstone, sparking discussions about the role of art, the responsibilities of public figures, and the fine line between critique and cruelty. The clash between Meryl Streep and Kelly Ripa wasn't just a moment, it was a movement. It forced viewers to confront their own beliefs about activism, influence, and the power of storytelling. Meryl's words lingered, a reminder that change doesn't always come with a megaphone, and that dignity in the face of provocation is a quiet kind of rebellion. Kelly, for her part, faced a reckoning, with some praising her boldness and others questioning her methods. What do you think? Was Meryl right to walk away, or should she have stayed to fight? Did Kelly cross a line, or was she just doing her job? Share your thoughts in the comments below and join the conversation that's taken the world by storm. And don't forget to subscribe for more unforgettable moments like this one.